SIG 10 December 2020. This is number 3. This is a little bit more on Antifa Ted and the shenanigans of his constituency and supporters in Portland. The Antifa occupiers, like I said, Antifa Ted's constituency and supporters, at the autonomous zone that sprung up in Portland this week appear to be preparing for a siege. Well, this is actually published yesterday, the 9th of December. As PJ Media's Victoria Taft reported, Antifa squatters took over a house in Portland, and when the government rightly evicted them, they set up an autonomous zone because why wouldn't they? Are they doing the same thing in Philadelphia? Or trying to, they're going to. On Wednesday, Portland's police chief reported that Antifa had fortified barricades, stockpiled weapons, and set up armed guards and threatened to kill police officers. Both the police chief and the mayor, Antifa Ted, have urged the rebels to lay down their arms, but it appears they're refusing to do so because why would they after months of acquiescence from and support from Antifa Ted? We want a peaceful and safe resolution to the occupation of public space on North Mississippi Avenue. We are greatly concerned about the fortification of barricades, stockpiling weapons, armed sentries, attacks on journalists, and threats to kill officers in graffiti in this public space. Chief Chuck Lovell tweeted on Wednesday, I encourage those involved to reach out to our demonstration liaisons, I love that, demonstration liaisons, so we can discuss a peaceful outcome. Yeah, because that's what they're all about, is peace. We are aware of the stockpile of weapons in the presence of firearms. We are aware of the threats of the community to media to police. We've seen the attacks. The Portland police will enforce the law and use force if necessary to restore order to the neighborhood, Lovell added in a brief speech about the autonomous zone. On Tuesday, Antifa Ted Wheeler, the mayor, Democrat, because why wouldn't he be, announced he was, quote, authorizing the Portland police to use all lawful means to end the illegal occupation of North Mississippi Avenue and to hold those violating our community laws accountable. Ooh, Antifa Ted. There will be no autonomous zone in Portland, end quote. Why aren't you happy with them now, Ted? You were quite happy with them this summer. What changed? I know exactly what changed. Anybody could see what's going on was exactly what changed. Wheeler went on to acknowledge the extremely radical claims of Marxist critical race theory that inspire much of the Antifa rioting. Well, he acknowledged, he supports it. Come on. In this, he supports it. Quote, we all agree. No, we don't all agree. Screw off, Ted. I don't agree. We all agree. To me, that's like, as we all know. Well, maybe not. Maybe we don't all know. To continue. We all agree that many of our nation's systems and structures are fundamentally racist. No, I'm not going to cuss. No, we don't know that many of our nation's systems and structures are fundamentally racist and require significant reform. That might be critical race theory, but it's not mine. Because it is incorrect. It's coming from a Marxist slant, which is only meant to divide. Ted. There's a housing crisis. Okay. Health crisis. Give it to you. An education crisis. Why is there an education crisis, Ted? Why don't you look at the Democrat-run Department of Education from the top down for, I don't know how many decades now? Literally the dumbing down of America's youth. Look what it's done to the promising minds that have gone to university, colleges. Yeah. That's what the crisis is. Marxism in the classroom. An employment crisis. An employment crisis, especially right now with COVID, with all you Democrats shutting down cities, telling people basically you can't work. Of course there's a housing crisis. You've created it. An employment crisis, rather. You've created it. A mental health crisis. The Democrats, of course, don't really care the number of people who have already committed suicide or are near suicidal because of the strains of a lot of this social isolation, because we're not meant to be isolated as human beings, one from the other. People do choose to do that occasionally. Yes, they do. But for the most part, human beings are very social creatures. We have to actually have interaction with other people. Constantly using a face mask is a form of isolation because we rely on cues that we see. We're visual. We look at cues in the face, the human body, the movements from the hands, the way the body moves, the expression. We as human beings, we as animals, gain a lot of information from that. And to not see a huge component of that right in our face, it's almost as if the masks are meant to dehumanize people, because then you can't actually see them. And an addiction crisis. Oh, and by the way, going back to the mental health crisis, it was the liberals, yet again, that in the 80s, I think, caused enough problems for mental institutions that were housing homeless, and other institutions that were housing homeless, that in the 80s sometime, it was under Reagan, they just let them go. They let them go. And what happened? You wound up with a lot of homeless on the streets. So they're do-gooders. All right. If there were problems institutionally, they should have been taken care of. But the answer was not to let a multitude of people out from shelter into the street, and thus creating a massive homeless problem. So when trying to fix something, all you did was compound things, and that's basically all liberals do, that I can tell. It's just compounding problems or creating problems where there weren't any. And an addiction crisis. An addiction crisis. Yeah. How about all that heroin coming into the country? Where's that coming from? How about the deal that the DEA had with a particular cartel south of the border? Run your drugs. Just, we'll run interference. Just run interference from the rest of them, and we'll just deal with you. Who created the drug crisis in the United States? And these crises disproportionately impact black people, do they? Let's assume they do, briefly. If they disproportionately affect one group of people over another, what responsibility does that group of people have for their actions and outcomes? Do they hold any responsibility whatsoever for any group of people? When you wake up in the morning, you choose the course of your day. Every decision you make affects the rest of your life, in a sense. I mean, you could go down and go to Denny's, have breakfast, converse politely with people, get up and go home. Even that, depending on your interactions with people, makes an impression. So we choose the course of our lives every day. to say that everything is rigged is not true. Maybe I will, not maybe, I will acknowledge that in our country's history, it was that way for groups of people, not just one group in particular, but groups, multiple. But somehow we all survived. Somehow those groups seem to make it through. It seems, for the most part. Again, personal responsibility, decisions we make every day. Yet Wheeler refused to follow the logic of the more radical Black Lives Matter and Antifa crowd, who use those arguments to justify rioting, looting, and arson. Quote, "It's also true that illegal trespassing, ignoring laws from police, blocking sidewalks and streets, and intimidating neighbors inflame these crises and make these crises more difficult to solve. That's what's happening on North Mississippi Avenue right now," Antifa Ted argued. The Antifa occupation appears to have emerged after a judge ordered that people illegally occupying a home must be evicted. Activists appear to have seized on the eviction as racist, oppressive, or otherwise illegitimate, because that's as low. That's like their baseline. That's like their baseline. This is wow. But I guess if you just beat the same drum just to try and convince people over and over again, this is what it is. Apparently, it works for some people. I don't know. Wheeler defended the eviction, noting that Multnomah County chose the time, place, and manner of the eviction, and Portland police provided support. "It's time for the encampment and occupation to end," the mayor concluded. "There are many ways to protest and work toward needed reform. Illegally occupying private property, openly carrying weapons, threatening, intimidating people are not among them." Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought about that this summer when you encouraged it. Wheeler is right to defend the rule of law in this case, but his sympathy for Marxist critical race theory undermines his case. Of course it does. If America's systems and structures are fundamentally racist, as the mayor claimed, that inspires irrational anger and an aimless attempt to overthrow the existing order by force if necessary, Wheeler himself repeatedly insisted that the violent Antifa riots that racked Portland this summer were peaceful. His constituency. He even attended one such riot, and he claimed that there were no justification for federal officers using tear gas while rioters threw a Molotov cocktail near where Wheeler was standing. Portland police should restore order, break up the Antifa autonomous zone, and defend the peace and safety of the city's citizens around North Mississippi Avenue. This should be a no-brainer. Sadly, this very Marxist critical race theory that inspires the riots has infiltrated the commanding heights of American culture. So much so that even the public official whose job it is to order the cops to restore order is echoing the very talking points that Antifa militants use to justify their crimes. Well, you know, when you've got a cheering section in government. The riots this summer ostensibly focused on helping the black community. No, they didn't. I wouldn't even use the word ostensibly. They were just there to riot. They didn't help a damn thing. They destroyed, for trying to help the black community. Please. They destroyed black lives, black livelihoods, black monuments, and at least 26 Americans have died in the riots, most of them black. The riots proved the most destructive in American history when it comes to insurance claims. Police should break up the siege and quickly. Wheeler should also consider the consequences of his radical rhetoric. You know damn well that's never going to happen. I quite enjoyed that. 623 out.